We're standing in Cornmarket, right in the centre of Oxford. And Cornmarket is one of the busiest commercial streets in the city. And it's been one of the busiest commercial streets in the city for about 900 years. But when you look at it today, it's quite difficult to detect signs of that history. It looks like any high street in any town. But if you look carefully, you can see a different story. So today, we're going to go into number 3 Cornmarket to find out something very interesting about what used to be here. The number 3 Cornmarket at street level looks like any other shop. The building above, you can see, is a little bit older. It's probably 18th century. It's quite an elegant frontage. But we're going to go inside in a minute and see something much older. I'm standing in the entrance to number 3 Cornmarket, and as you can see, it's a little bit unprepossessing. Lots of businesses in this building, as there may well have been for many years. But if we look just behind the front of this building, the street front, there is an interesting relic, a clue as to what lies behind this building. And to my side here is a battered piece of timber, an upright piece of timber, which is actually part of the original doorway to this building. And this timber probably dates from the late 15th century or around 1500. So we've climbed 2 flights of stairs and we've entered the upper floor of number 3 Cornmarket. And this is where we can see something very special indeed. Because this building is one of the very few surviving medieval timber-framed houses in Oxford. Oxford, of course, has many historic buildings and many medieval buildings, but most of those are associated with its colleges or its churches. But here we have an urban timber-framed house, very exciting. And I'm just going to show you some glimpses of that timber framing. So in the corner of the room here, we can see under the paintwork, which we'll come to in a minute, this is the brace of the timber frame, which probably dates from the late 15th century. And here we've got the original pegs, which attach the brace to this upright timber. It's a very, very rare survival and one of the many reasons why this is such an important place. So what was this timber frame building? Well, we know that there was a building on this site since probably the 1100s, but this building dates from later, so about 1500. In the 16th century, it became a tavern. And in the 1560s and 70s, it was a wine tavern. It was owned in the 1560s by a man called John Tattleton. And we think that at that time, the building stretched all the way back from Cornmarket almost to the Covered Market now. So it was a much bigger building than it is today. It had about 20 rooms. We don't know the layout for sure, but we think that many of those rooms may have been effectively snugs where you could come and drink your wine. This room may have been one of those rooms. It may have been somewhere where you could come and have a drink, or it may have been part of the family house. So it may have been a room which John Tattleton and his family used to stay in. What makes this building even more exciting is that it retains this. These paintings date from the time of it being a wine tavern, so from the 1560s or 1570s. And it's very, very unusual to find effectively domestic wall paintings surviving. There are very few examples, so we're lucky to have these. Now, these are not the top rank of painting. This is not high art. This is a really nice decoration of an interior. So you need to think about it in the way you'd think about decorating your own house. You get the decorators in, they put up some wallpaper, they may paint the room for you, and then a few years later, you repaint. What we see is something that's designed to look a little bit like a textile. Because if you really had money in the 1560s, what you would be doing would be hanging textiles on your wall. And actually, it does look a little bit like a carpet design. You have here this trellis work, and within each of the holes of the trellis, you have a little cluster of flowers or fruit. There are grapes here, for example, and there are about 3 or 4 different styles, little different types of flowers shown. What's really exciting about it, I think, is it was obviously painted by local people, and it's not perfect. Now we know it was probably painted by local craftsmen because the palette that it uses, there's just a few colours. There's a sort of earthy, yellowy ochre colour here, orange, a deeper red and a black and a white. If you wanted to use more extensive colours like greens or blues, you needed to be a member of the Painter or Stainers Guild. So this is not that kind of painting. These are basic colours and they're also based on pigments that could be found locally. So the ochre that was used, for example, to create this colour here was probably dug up at Shotover. So I like to think we've got an example here of Oxford craftsmen using Oxford materials to paint the walls for an Oxford tavern. What's lovely to see is that it isn't completely perfect. It's not been laid out beforehand or planned very well, so that the trellis work goes slightly off as you go along the wall. So it's easy to imagine that where maybe they started here and started doing the work, hadn't laid it out beforehand, and as you go along the wall it gets a little bit wonky. And then along the top you have this frieze which has a religious message in it, which is in English, and it would have started here. We've lost a little bit of it. And it would have said here, first of thy rising and last of thy rest, be thou God's servant, for that hold I best. In the morning early, serve God devoutly, fear God above all things, honour the King. There was a fashion at the time for combining this kind of decorative, fictive tapestry, if you like, with a religious frieze running around the top. And there are other examples of this sort of design surviving in one or two houses, one in Buckinghamshire and one in Hertfordshire. But it's a very rare survival, so we should be very, very proud of it. The reason this survived against all the odds is that in about 1600, the next owner of the tavern, a man called John Davenant, panelled over the paintings. So he obviously, it was changing fashion. Maybe he wanted something that was lower maintenance. And so he put panelling in front of these paintings. And you can see actually where the panels went. And these panels stayed in front of the paintings until 1927. So for 300 years or so. And it wasn't until 1927, when somebody was refurbishing the room, that they discovered the paintings behind the panelling. Now, the really interesting thing about John Davenant is that he was a friend of William Shakespeare. He came from London, where he was a vintner, so he ran a wine tavern in London. And then in 1600, he came to Oxford to run this wine tavern, which was then called the Salutation. He had got to know William Shakespeare in London, and they were good friends. William Shakespeare was godfather to his son. And we know that William Shakespeare, who of course was based in London, that's where he worked, that's where he was writing his plays and performing them, but he used to visit his wife and family in Stratford-on-Avon a couple of times a year. And he used to break his journey here on number 3 Cornmarket, then called the Salutation, to stay with his friend John Davenant. Now, we don't know for sure that he slept in this room or that he drank wine in this room, but it's very likely that he did come into this space. So today, the building is looked after by Oxford Preservation Trust. We're a small charity, and we get involved in trying to save the best of Oxford's historic buildings and places. And this is a space that we're very proud of and very lucky to care for. And we open the painted room to the public once a month, and you can find details about how to get into it on our website. And we also open it every year for Oxford Open Doors, which is a great weekend that we organise in September, in which we work with about 140 different building owners to let the public into them for free over the weekend. And we also have other special events here too. So if you want to find out more, do check out the Oxford Preservation Trust website and come and see us.